We have in Texas Jimmie, whose pronouns are king and lord, evidently, who has a question
That's
for us about
confusing.
Jimmie. You're on with Forrest and Matt.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see my question on screen. It's basically, do you think there could be, in any conceivable way, that you could imagine a God that you would accept that is aligned with evolution, that doesn't violate any physical law, and that is ultimately dissociated with the supernatural?
No.
I don't know what the characteristics of that God would be or what qualifies as a God within the classical. I'm not saying that a God has to be supernatural. It's I would need a definition of what that entity is and why it's justified to consider it a God. Because like you could say I'm a God, and like if you moved me back in time and moved me back personally 10 years to when my brain was slightly more functional, I could appear like a god to some primitive culture somewhere, but I would say that the appearance of a god isn't necessarily a god. And so it's certainly none of the gods of classical theism or anything like that would make sense. What would be the characteristics that you think would qualify as a god if it isn't supernatural and doesn't violate any physical laws?
Yeah, that's kind of my thing. Is like when I think about the word God, I think about something with crazy powers to manipulate time, space, matter, blah blah blah. Like that wouldn't work in reality. So like, do you have a different definition that we're not using?
Yeah, I do, because that was my issue last time when I spoke to Forrest, is that he seemed to automatically assume that God should be something that is supernatural. And, maybe I can invoke something like, you may not agree, but Einsteinian, the Spinozan God.
That's not a God.
Which I associate with like pantheism. I'm sorry, pantheism, but I kind of see it more aligned with panentheism as opposed to pantheism. And I guess maybe that's more the direction I would take it in if I was going to try to define.
So basically, if you just tweak the definition of the word God to be just stuff happening, then we can say that there's God.
No, I wouldn't even say that. I don't think it's a tweak at all, because this is the way I perceive like a lot of the early philosophers and the way they perceived the word God. The early theologians, even, maybe even some Buddhists or Hindu yogis, the way they had their perception of God. Of course, Hindus don't say God; they say Brahman. And
right. And so, but like that's the thing, though, is it like you're right. A lot of early philosophers and even a lot of scientists have used the word God as sort of a stand-in to the order of the universe, just the way that shit works. And here's an anthropomorphic way of saying that things happened, and like that's fine, but that's not the God that like the rest of the people around us, that's not the God that my friends and neighbors in my community believe in. And if I were to try to use that definition in common language, it wouldn't get me anywhere. So like, if you want to use this kind of poetic version of God in like what speaking colloquially, I don't think it's going to work. It's just a lot of work for no reward. I don't get what you would get out of it to do that. I don't believe in any gods at all.
What I'm saying. Well, that wasn't what I was saying at all.
Hey, Jimmie, I'm happy to address what you're saying, but when you say that you view it as more as panentheistic, the panentheistic God is a God that transcends the physical. The Spinoza's God, that's not a personal being or agent. It's just a metaphor. Are you talking about God as a metaphor or God as an actual thinking agent?
Well, when you say actual thinking agent, I do believe this God would possess consciousness, but not necessarily volition, as in a thinking agent per se, just merely consciousness. And in that,
where would it derive consciousness if not from a brain?
Yeah. Well, I don't really think that consciousness is something necessarily generated by a brain.
Do you have
any example of consciousness absent a brain?
No, that's well. What I mean is that I think the brain is a type of medium through which consciousness occurs, but I don't think it's the generator.
Jimmie,
what evidence
Jimmie,
do you have to support that assumption? Like, where are you getting that?
Well, that the brain is more like Michio Kaku, who talks about in kind of like a radio transceiver, that we tune into this.
Jimmie, we asked for evidence. We asked for evidence. We didn't ask you to cite a kook.
Cite evidence. Well, I don't think there is evidence we can necessarily point to because superstring theory.
So
those are all
Jimmie,
science that we
Jimmie,
no answers for.
Jimmie, why would you believe something as big as I think the brain is a medium for consciousness to project through if you admit that you don't have evidence for that? Why are you running around believing things without evidence?
I have a totally different line of questioning whenever we're done with this one, so don't hang up on.
I do. I'm not a theoretical physicist, but I don't.
Jimmie, I don't. Jimmie,
that's not what he asked.
I didn't ask you if you were a theoretical physicist. I asked, why are you believing things that you admit you don't have evidence for?
Well, I'm telling you why. I'm not just accepting like, okay, well, I don't know. I'm trying to extrapolate from what we know now. Hypothesizing.
Jimmie,
Jimmie.
A hypothesis needs to be testable, which means it also needs to be falsifiable. And the process of testing a hypothesis involves gathering evidence. Don't pretend like what you're doing is hypothesis testing. I'm asking, why are you advocating for a position that you admit you don't have evidence for? If your answer is, I'm just pulling out of my butt and I can't prove it to anybody, that's fine, but don't waste my time.
Sure, but do you think theoretical physicists say, like, I just pulled these multi-dimensions out of my butt?
Jimmie,
not even close to the same thing.
Jimmie, I'm not asking you any questions about theoretical physicists. How is my asking you to justify your position in any way responded to by you talking about theoretical fucking physicists?
Well, because you want concrete evidence right now, and that's something we don't have.
Jimmie?
You're a physicist.
Okay, I'm going to mute you because I'm going to start yelling. I'm asking you, Jimmie, what evidence you fucking have for the position you've stated. If I'm going to unmute you in a second, and I'm going to get an answer to my question, and then Forrest has a different line of questions. I'm going to ask you the question one more time, and I would like for you to respond to it. But if you say theoretical physics, theoretical physicists, or talk about what other people do with their other beliefs, I'm going to mute you again because that is irrelevant. If somebody says to me, Matt, why do you believe this? I don't go, well, theoretical physicists are making shit up too. So, Jimmie, do you have any evidence for your proposed view on the brain and consciousness?
I don't think any of us do. Not I, not you, not Forrest, for any ultimate conclusion about God.
Yes, I do.
Okay. So hang on. I'm muting you again. Jimmie, I asked you if you had any evidence, and your answer was, I don't think I do or you do or anybody does about God. You, sir, are dishonest as fuck. The answer to my question was no, you don't have evidence. However, the question wasn't about God. It was about consciousness and the brain. And whether or not I or Forrest have evidence for our positions or not is a separate issue. I'm going to unmute you, and I'm going to let Forrest ask his line of questions. But I tell you this right now, if you do not pay attention and answer the question that's asked and behave honestly, I will drop this call. Because I have no more patience for your time-wasting crap. Go ahead, Forrest.
So it's really quick. Two things. Number one, I just want to point out that consciousness is the realm of neuroscience. So, like, I'm sure lots of theoretical physicists have lots of ideas about it. It's a thing that neuroscientists are studying, and they have a lot of cool ideas about it. And not a single neuroscientist I've ever even heard of would argue that consciousness is some sort of field that your brain is able to tap into. It's pretty obviously a function of the brain. We don't know the very most fundamental parts of it yet, but we don't know the very most fundamental parts of lots of things. And just because if we didn't know how the Earth was formed, that wouldn't be a reason for us to say that plate tectonics might be some like ethereal, magical thing being guided through the universe, being transmitted through the Earth. Like that's silly. Do you see why that's silly?
Well, neuroscience doesn't even have evidence that consciousness is even generated by the brain. There's no evidence for that in neuroscience.
There's a ton of it. There's a ton of it. There's a ton of very obvious evidence.
Can you name one?
Yeah, changes to the brain alter consciousness. That would be a good one.
That's not one. I'm talking about a citation, something legitimate.
Well, I'm not going to pull up a citation for you here. We're just talking about evidence. I'm not going to cite my sources because I'm not going to go dig into Google Scholar at this moment.
I tell you what, fucker. We'll take as much time as we want, and it starts by me hanging up on your ass.
I've got one more. Wait. Don't hang up on him yet.
No.
Is he still there?
No.
Damn it. I had one more thing I wanted to know. I wasn't interested in that line of questioning at all. I was going to just throw that out there because it's okay.
I hit my limit on the, no, give me evidence and you take as much time as you want bullshit.
Like, I'm gonna sit here and fucking go to Google Scholar and pull something up. Like, that's not my job to do that for you. I'm not doing your homework. I'm telling you a line of evidence that I learned in neuroscience class in college that we talked about that exact thing. So like, sorry, take it up with them. No, I wanted to talk to him about pronouns because his pronouns were king and lord. And I wanted to ask, like, if he knew what pronouns were and what they're used for. That's what I wanted to do, because I can't say he had a bunch of dumb arguments and I didn't know how to talk to him. I would have to say King had a bunch of bad arguments and I didn't know how to talk to Lord. Why does that fucking make any sense to you, dude? Why would you, like, you have to be just deliberately just looking for a reason to be an asshole to give pronouns like that. And I wanted to know if you knew how grammar worked and you fucked it up. Sad times.
I wish I'd let you ask him about the pronouns, but honestly, this individual who decides that despite not having any scientific evidence for his proposition, thinks he's tapped in because of Michio Kaku to the secret of how the brain works, and that it is actually a conduit for something else, something he has no evidence for. Meanwhile, all of the available evidence shows that consciousness or thought is a product of the brain. Now, it could be more than that as well, but at a minimum, it is that. And neuroscience and being able to, for example, mirror neurons, and listening to people like V.S. Ramachandran talking about split brain patients who have, in order to stop temporal lobe epilepsy, have gone through a hemispherectomy, and they end up with two distinct consciousnesses, two individuals who communicate independently, one of them communicating verbally and one of them communicating written, in the same brain, one of which is an atheist, one of which is a theist.
I know the exact term you're talking about.
I'm sorry that King Lord, the dipshit of Pronounville, is completely uninformed on the basics of neuroscience. But my position is that consciousness is, in every circumstance that we can identify, completely correlated with brain activity. And no consciousness has been observed or detected absent brain activity. And yet, despite that strong correlation, he's concluded that the brain is a conduit for something else. But even if that was the case, I just realized that, oh, Jay Morgan, guess what button I'm allowed on now? Somebody said I shouldn't be allowed on the button. I got a ban button too. Bring it, bitch.
Snap.
But when you say that there's a consciousness that is God, but it's not an agent, and you say there's a consciousness absent a brain, even if you felt that the brain was the conduit for consciousness being something else, you have no reason to think that God consciousness can operate without a similar conduit. So even his model doesn't demonstrate what he thinks it does.
But Matt, even though I just literally just reached behind me and pulled out my undergraduate neuroscience notebook and I scrolled through here and I didn't find anything at all about, consciousness existing outside of a brain, that doesn't mean that we can't prove that it isn't real, and that means it just might be.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jimmie Snow, executive producer of The Line, and the rumors are true. Forrest Valkai is, in fact, a hostage in my basement. If you would like to contribute to his freedom one day, you can do so by supporting us over on Patreon or becoming a channel member. There are specific tiers for specific shows or the channel at large. You can also send us super thanks. Those are great. You can like, comment, and subscribe. Also, fudge the algorithm. Go to one of these things. The algorithm doesn't matter. It thinks it knows you better than we do. Better than you do? I know you better, Hank. There's a bunch of people named Hank. I just freaked way out. Okay, go to one of these.